Hey, I'm Monica, I'm a sports physio, and today I'm here to break down the recent injuries sustained by the well-known football player Kevin De Bruyne. Kevin is currently playing for Napoli. He sustained the injury in the 33rd minute of the match against Inter Milan. Kevin was taking his penalty shot, and as he finished his kick, which he got the goal, which is great, but as he finished his kick, he then grabbed onto the top part of his hamstring and he wasn't able to put much weight onto that right leg and he needed some help to walk off the field. So this is a first sign that there has been a severe injury that has occurred. He would have felt it towards the end of the kicking motion as the leg was slowing down and decelerating. This is a common mechanism of how you sustain a hamstring injury, and we call this a stretch type mechanism. So the hip is forced upwards into flexion and the knee is relatively straight in an extended position. And as you can see, if the kick with Kevin, he's following through and his hamstring has to work really hard to decelerate the leg, especially under length, and there would be a forceful contraction that happens here. Another example that you can sustain a stretch type injury is if the player was going for a slide tackle or if they went into like a front split motion. Another common mechanism that you can sustain a hamstring injury is what we call a speed type injury. And this is where a player will be at least over 80% of their maximal speed or at maximal speed running. And this can happen like during a sprint and they can feel their hamstring in this moment. If we check out the anatomy of your hamstrings, they're comprised of 3 muscles that are located at the back of your thigh. And they start and originate from your sit bone, which is what we call your ischial tuberosity, and they travel down your thigh and cross the knee, and each one will insert into a different spot. If we look at the biceps femoris muscle in particular, which is the muscle that Kevin sustained a high-grade tear in, it's made up of 2 heads. It's got your long head and your short head. Your long head starts from your sit bone, that ischial tuberosity, and then your short head starts on the linea aspera of your femur, which is your thigh bone, and then they both come down and merge to then attach onto the head of your fibula. Now your hamstring muscles as a whole work together to bend your knee, bring your leg back, so what we call hip extension, and they even play a role at rotating your lower leg outward. There are different classifications out there on grading muscle injuries, and a common one that's used in high-level sport is what we call the BAMI classification, which has 4 grades, and then there's letters assigned to the grades which tell us the location of the injury, whereas the number tells us the extent and the size of the injury sustained. And with the letters, and this is my budgie Wilbur. He's decided to join me on this video, even though he doesn't have any hamstrings. So there's A, B, and C. So A being myofascial in location, B is musculotendinous in location, and C is intratendinous. So for example, a grade 3 injury would be where the MRI shows there's a large injury present that's affecting more than 50% of the muscle's width, and there's actual fibers that are torn that are greater than 5 centimeters. Whereas a grade 4 injury is where there's a complete rupture of that tendon or the muscle. After the injury, Kevin did get an MRI done, which showed there was a high-grade tear of his biceps femoris muscle, so it would have been at least a grade 3 injury, and he has since got surgery done within the week of the injury, which has been a success. Kevin has had previous hamstring surgery back in 2023 on this right side, where they found there was a tendon tear and there was a lot of scar tissue in the hamstring from all his previous injuries. The doctors have clarified though that his recent injury is not in the same location, so it could slightly reduce the time back to play, but we're still looking for at least a 4-month return. Surgery is normally considered if there has been a complete rupture of the muscle or tendon, and if there is retraction of more than 2 centimeters of the tendon or the muscle. It can also be considered if more than half the fibers are torn in the muscle and if the tendon is involved. Surgery would have been considered here for Kevin again, as the severity of the injury would have indicated the need for surgery, and he has had chronic and recurrent hamstring strains for a few years now. Let's look at some of the things that may have contributed Kevin to getting lots of hamstring injuries in his career. Now, first we know that having a hamstring injury previously puts you at more risk of having another hamstring strain in the future. And the reason this is because when we get a strain, the body repairs this by building scar tissue in the area, which remodels over time. However, the scar tissue is still a bit more firmer and not as flexible as normal muscle tissue would be. And that means that the muscle tissue next to the scarring has to work a lot harder to compensate for this. And we see there's a change in the way the muscle and tendons interact with each other. Accumulated exposure also plays a role. So if the prior 5 minutes to the injury, there was a lot of high speed running and it was a greater amount, that can also puts someone at risk of getting that acute strain. Previous injuries such as an ankle sprain, a calf strain, and low back pain can also contribute to the risk of a hamstring injury, which I believe Kevin has had this before. If we look at football-specific factors, Kevin does play as a central midfielder or an attacking midfielder, and especially as an attacking midfielder, there is a lot of hamstring load there because you're doing a lot of high-speed running and you're doing a lot of accelerating and decelerating. The football schedule is also very congested and there's not much recovery time. Kevin has even said at one point that he'll be playing games like every 3 days just about, and there's not enough time to recover and to work on the things that he needs to work on, and that can also put him at risk of sustaining an injury. And there are a lot of other factors. It is quite complex. So if there has been an increase in volume, if the grounds are quicker or firmer, if the actual pace of the game has increased, even if there's differences in the strength quality, and age can also play a role. I mean, playing against Inter Milan could even be a risk factor. He did injure his hammy previously in 2023 in the UCL finals when he did play against them. But all jokes aside, it is going to be a bit of a process for him and they won't want to be rushing him back to play. So they're looking at end of February, early March next year. He has had previous surgery. He has had lots of hamstring strains in the past. So they're going to want to be taking his rehab more steady and slowly. And they're going to really make sure that he's going to tick off all the criteria that he needs to before going back. And some of the criteria we look at is making sure that you've got at least back to your baseline strength and baseline flexibility, that you can tolerate high intensity training sessions at the same level, if not greater than the match demand is, as well as making sure that you've got good psychological readiness. There'll be lots done in trying to prevent the injury from happening again too. So things like monitoring the player wellness, checking in on their fatigue levels as well, making sure that Kevin continues to do like eccentric hamstring strengthening, so you're loading the hamstring under length, even continuing lumbo-pelvic exercises because that has been shown to reduce the risk of hamstring injury, as well as doing speed work such as sprints and high-speed running, even working on reactivity of that hamstring muscle. Hamstring strength testing is also a great early detection tool because if there is a greater than 14% reduction in his hamstring strength, they can flag it and then recheck it later that day. And if it's still low, they might decide to further examine to make sure the risk of injury is low. And that's where they might modify his training and limit the amount of high speed running that he does, the amount of kicking, or they might change the position that he plays. Kevin is a well-respected football player and he has had a great mindset over his career in getting through all his injuries and the rehab process. And I look forward to seeing him back. Thanks so much for listening. If there's any other athletes you'd like me to talk about, please just pop it down in the comments below.